Welcome to Hunting the Hunter, where we uncover the dark truths behind some of America's most notorious serial killers and mass murderers. My name is Evan Landon, and I am your host for this series. Today, we dive deep into the twisted life of one of the most infamous predators in modern history, Ted Bundy. First, please subscribe to our channel, and at the end of the video, if you like it, please like and share. It helps our channel to grow and for us to continue to bring you great shows like this. When we come back, we'll take a hard look at Bundy and the crimes he committed. Ted Bundy's name is synonymous with terror. When we hear his name today, a chill runs up our spines, but before we associated his name to the horrific crimes he committed, we saw him just as any other guy next door. The kind of person that you never would have believed could become a serial killer and commit the crimes that he did. Intelligent, charming, and calculating, he left a trail of death across multiple states throughout the 1970s. But who was Ted Bundy before he became the monster we know today? And how did he manage to evade capture for so long? Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24th, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. Raised by his maternal grandparents, he believed for much of his childhood that his mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was his sister. This deception would become a defining factor in his development, contributing to deep-rooted psychological issues. Bundy attended Woodrow Wilson High School in Tacoma, Washington. During his teenage years, he exhibited troubling behaviors that foreshadowed his later crimes. He displayed signs of antisocial behavior from a young age, struggling with social interactions and often feeling isolated and misunderstood. Neighbors and acquaintances described him as a bully who enjoyed instilling fear in others. Despite these difficulties, he excelled academically and eventually enrolled at the University of Washington, where he studied psychology. Reports indicate that Bundy engaged in acts of animal cruelty, such as hanging a stray cat, dousing it with lighter fluid, and setting it on fire, causing the animal to scream in pain. Additionally, Bundy would lead younger children into the woods, strip them of their clothing, and leave them terrified and screaming. He also constructed makeshift traps, known as punji traps, which injured at least one girl who fell onto a sharpened stick. During high school, Bundy was arrested at least twice on suspicion of burglary and motor vehicle theft. At age 18, the details of these incidents were expunged from his record, as is customary in Washington and many other states. On January 4, 1974, in the University District of Seattle, Bundy broke into the apartment of 18-year-old Karen Sparks. As she was sleeping, Bundy brutally bludgeoned her with a steel rod taken from the girl's own bed frame. After that, he sexually assaulted Karen, causing extensive internal injuries. It was her roommates who discovered her in her bedroom, barely alive and in critical condition. The young lady miraculously survived her attack but suffered permanent damage and other physical trauma. She is the first known victim of Bundy's violent spree that would continue for the next several years and affect 7 states. Indeed, it set the tone for the brutality that would define his later crimes. In the beginning, of course, authorities had no idea they were dealing with a serial killer. That's because the nature of Bundy's attacks varied significantly during his early crimes, as if he were trying to find the perfect method. Barely a month later, on February 1st, 1974, Ted Bundy abducted 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy from her basement bedroom in her home in Seattle, Washington. Healy had been attending the University of Washington, where she studied psychology and working as a morning radio weather reporter. She had gone to bed as usual on the night of her disappearance, after an evening out with friends. Bundy entered the home by breaking a window and entering the apartment. He located her bedroom and struck her over the head with an object, rendering the young woman unconscious. He proceeded to wrap the young woman in a bedsheet and carry her out of the house, leaving bloodstains on her pillow and the other bedclothes, which were later discovered by investigators. Healy's roommates were unaware of the abduction, and when they didn't see her in the morning, they thought she had left early for the radio station after finding her bed neatly made the next. Despite exhaustive searching, she would remain missing for over a year before anyone knew what had happened. Her skull and a jawbone were found later on at Taylor Mountain, an area east of Seattle where Bundy would ultimately end up dumping multiple victims. The discovery of the girl's remains, along with those of several other women, would serve to confirm Bundy's pattern of abduction, murder, and body disposal in secluded wilderness areas. Healy's disappearance marked the beginning of Ted Bundy's killing spree in Washington and Oregon, and it was one of the first cases to draw attention to and to point out the very real possibility of a serial killer preying on young women in that region. We'll be back in a moment.
Evil often hides in plain sight, but behind the eyes of America's most notorious killers lie truths darker than fiction. Explore the chilling realities behind the most prolific serial killers and mass murderers in American history. Using forensic psychology, investigative detail, and unfiltered insight, America's dark legacy takes you inside the minds of monsters. Are you ready to face the darkness? America's Dark Legacy, available now on Amazon. See the link in the description below, along with our merch store link.
Donna Gail Manson was a 19-year-old student who was attending Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. She was known for her artistic interests and unconventional lifestyle. She was an intelligent and free-spirited young lady who loved life. She left her dorm on March 12, 1974, to attend a jazz concert on campus, but she never arrived at the venue. The campus was bustling with activity that night, so it is unclear as to exactly where or how Ted Bundy encountered her. Despite extensive searches and investigations, Donna's body was never found. Bundy later confessed to abducting and killing Donna Gail Manson. He told police that he had disposed of her body on Taylor Mountain. This is the same site where later victims of Bundy's would be found. Despite the confession, there was no physical evidence ever found that linked him to her disappearance. Her remains were never recovered. Bundy's confession to killing Donna was one of many that revealed his method of preying on young women in the Pacific Northwest during the early stages of his killing spree. Her disappearance also highlighted how Bundy exploited the vulnerability of college campuses, which were often considered safe environments. We'll be back in a moment.
Those of us are not inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands.
Susan Elaine Roncourt attended Washington State College in Ellensburg, Washington. It is now called Central Washington University. Witnesses saw her leaving an evening meeting that she had attended. The meeting had been an advisory session about campus dormitory housing on April 17, 1974. Her intention was to meet a friend so that they could do laundry together, but the friend said that she had never arrived. Later on, during interrogation, Bundy would admit to luring Roncourt away from her intended destination on the pretense of his being injured and needing help, for some reason due to an injury he had. This ruse would turn out to be one of his most common ways of luring girls away. Her remains, including her skull and a jawbone, were eventually found on Taylor Mountain, which is east of Seattle. The girl's disappearance was particularly troubling to detectives as they began to realize that they had a potential serial killer on their hands. This murder began to draw an emerging pattern that fit young women going missing in the Pacific Northwest, all under similar circumstances. Roberta Kathleen Parks disappeared on May 6, 1974. By this time, Bundy was killing girls at least once a month that is known of. Given the fact that investigators believe that the death count for Bundy could potentially exceed 100, the death rate may well have been more during that period. She attended Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. She was 22 years old and majored in psychology. On the night of her disappearance, she had been upset following a phone call with her father. She decided to walk from her dormitory to meet friends for coffee at the Memorial Union building. She never arrived. Bundy would later confess to abducting and murdering Roberta Parks, admitting that he transported her body across state lines from Oregon to Washington. Her skeletal remains were discovered on Taylor Mountain, Bundy's now favorite dumping ground. Roberta's disappearance marked Bundy's first known murder outside of Washington state, indicating that his hunting grounds were expanding. The month of June in 1974 would mark the first known time that Bundy killed more than one person in a month. The first was Brenda Carroll Ball, a 22-year-old woman who was last seen leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien, Washington. Witnesses recalled the girl talking to a man who had a sling on his arm. This was a ruse Bundy would often use to feign injury. Ultimately, it helped, along with his charm, to lure the women to his car by appearing harmless and in need of some help. Under interrogation was when Bundy would admit that he had killed Brenda Ball and then dumping her body on Taylor Mountain amongst the other victims' remains. Her skull was also identified as part of the remains there. The significance of Brenda Ball's disappearance was the fact that it had happened near Seattle, Washington, where several other victims had recently gone missing. This is when police actually realized that they had a serial killer on their hands who was targeting the young women in the area. Unlike other serial killers whose chosen victims were people who lived on the fringes of society, Bundy liked to target the good girls in society. Nancy Wilcox disappeared on October 1st, 1974, from Holiday, Utah, and would be Bundy's youngest victim to date. She was a cheerleader at Olympus High School. The last time she was seen, she was driving away in her yellow Volkswagen, with plans to pick up a soda before visiting a friend's house. The young lady never arrived at her friend's home. Ted Bundy would later claim her as one of his victims, stating that he abducted her to satisfy his sexual urges. He insisted that he did not intend to kill the girl, but would not elaborate as to what happened to cause him to do so. He told investigators that he buried her body near Capitol Reef National Park, but no remains were ever recovered. Bundy liked to think he was controlling the interrogations, and he would only give police the information that he wanted and stay tight-lipped about anything else. Not only was she Bundy's youngest victim to date, it would also mark his first move into another state, Utah. We'll be back in a moment.
Evil often hides in plain sight. But behind the eyes of America's most notorious killers lie truths darker than fiction. Explore the chilling realities behind the most prolific serial killers and mass murderers in American history. Using forensic psychology, investigative detail, and unfiltered insight, America's dark legacy takes you inside the minds of monsters. Are you ready to face the darkness? America's Dark Legacy, available now on Amazon. See the link in the description below, along with our merch store link.
Janice Ann Ott and Denise Marie Naslund disappeared on July 14, 1974, near Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah, Washington. Janice was 23 years old and Denise was 19. The two girls vanished the same day at the popular recreational area close to Seattle. Witnesses described a man with his arm in a sling, introducing himself as Ted, and asking for help loading a sailboat onto his car. Bundy admitted to abducting both women within hours of each other. He lured them separately to his car, incapacitated them, and drove them to a remote location where he murdered them. Their skeletal remains were later discovered together at Issaquah. This double abduction was particularly audacious and marked a dramatic escalation in Bundy's boldness. The fact that he targeted two women in broad daylight from a crowded public park demonstrated his growing confidence and need for greater risk to satisfy his urges. Nancy Wilcox disappeared on October 1st, 1974 from Holiday, Utah, and would be Bundy's youngest victim to date. She was a cheerleader at Olympus High School. The last time she was seen, she was driving away in her yellow Volkswagen with plans to pick up a soda before going to a friend's house for a visit. The young lady never arrived at the friend's home. Ted Bundy would later claim her as one of his victims, stating that he abducted her to satisfy his sexual urges. He insisted that he did not intend to kill the girl, but would not elaborate as to what happened to cause him to do so. He told investigators that he buried her body near Capitol Reef National Park, but no remains were ever recovered. Bundy liked to think he was controlling the interrogations, and would only give police the information that he wanted and would stay tight-lipped about anything else. Not only was she Bundy's youngest victim to date, It would also mark his first move into another state. Utah. Melissa Ann Smith lived in Midvale, Utah, and had a good family life. She was safe, she thought, because her dad was the chief of police. She couldn't be more wrong. On October 18, 1974, she had left a friend's around 10:30 p.m. to walk home. The 17-year-old girl often walked home around the same time when she had been visiting her friend, and had no reason that the night would be anything different from any other night. She disappeared, sparking an intense search for the girl. Newspapers picked up the story and ran with it, giving extensive coverage like because her father was the chief of police. 9 days later, her body was found in Summit Park, some 20 miles from where she was abducted. There were extensive signs of sexual assault, blunt force trauma, and strangulation. Evidence and the autopsy indicated that she had been alive for up to a week before being killed, which indicated prolonged captivity and torture. This was a change from Bundy's usual M.O., which in itself was a horrifying development in his methods. The fact that Melissa's father was the chief of police was not only devastating, but it also added a personal dimension to the fear in the community. One also has to wonder whether or not the prolonged torture and captivity of the girl happened just because he was changing the way he did things, or if it was because her father was a policeman. Laura Ann Amey aspired to be a fashion designer. The 17-year-old high school girl disappeared on Halloween night, October 31st, 1974. She had been out with friends and was last seen leaving a cafe in Lehi. Her body was discovered close to a full month later, nearly a month later in American Fork Canyon. Her body was nude and in an advanced state of decomposition. Bundy would later confess to picking her up, sexually assaulting her, and then killing her shortly after Melissa Smith's murder. Laura's murder showed how quickly Bundy was escalating, moving from one victim to the next in just a matter of days. Was the escalation because he thought he would be caught soon? Or was he just getting so confident that he believed he would never be caught at all? As with the other cases, the level of the violence in his crimes and the isolated location of her body matched Bundy's established pattern of sadistic control and concealment. One of the eeriest aspects of Ted Bundy is how duplicitous he was, not just in hiding his crimes, but in the jarring contrast between his public behavior and private monstrosity. Here was a man who could bludgeon women to death on Saturday night and then play the upstanding citizen on Sunday morning. Bundy's life was a study in contradictions, and understanding those inconsistencies is key to understanding him. Bundy would later claim to Dr. Dobson that reading detective magazines and pornography is what led him to serial murder. He used that line often, especially in his final interviews. Most famously, he repeated it to Dr. James Dobson the night before his execution. It was part of what many experts now see as his last manipulative narrative, trying to shift blame to violent media instead of owning his actions. He claimed that a step-by-step progression of consuming graphic pornography and detective magazines desensitized him and fueled his fantasies. Of course, it was a calculated move. Bundy knew he had an audience and that Dobson's evangelical platform could amplify a more redemptive final image. He wasn't just confessing, he was trying to control the narrative even in death. Most psychologists and criminologists today dismiss this explanation as Bundy doing what Bundy always did: lie, manipulate, and craft a version of himself that served his needs in the moment. Ted Bundy attempted to abduct Carol DeRanch on November 8, 1974. It happened in Murray, Utah, and the quick thinking and action of the 18-year-old not only saved her life, but also helped to bring Ted Bundy closer to finally being caught, putting an end to his murderous campaign. She was shopping at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah, when she was approached by a clean-cut man who had introduced himself as Officer Rosalind. He told the girl that someone had tried to break into her car as he presented a badge to her, and told her that she had to come with him to the police station in order to complete a report of the attempted break-in. The girl was hesitant, but ultimately agreed to accompany him. They got into his car, but instead of driving toward the police station, the man pulled the car into a side street and attempted to handcuff her, with one cuff closing but the other missing. What he didn't realize was that Carol had noticed a shift in his demeanor, with his charm giving way to aggression. This would ultimately prove to save her life as she fought back furiously inside the vehicle. In the chaos that had ensued, she managed to break free of Bundy's grip, open the car door, and run into the streets. A couple passing by in a car saw her frantic escape and picked the girl up, taking her to the police station to file a report of the incident. The girl was badly shaken, but most importantly, she was alive, and her description of the attacker as well as his car would ultimately serve to bring Ted Bundy down and end his murderous spree. Bundy was finally arrested in 1975. Carol DeRanch positively identified him in a police lineup, and that led to his conviction of aggravated kidnapping in Utah. This would keep him in jail long enough for investigators to uncover the true scope of Bundy's crimes. Carol's survival marked a turning point in the investigation of Bundy. The girl's detailed memory, courage, and willingness to testify in court made her one of the best and most important witnesses in the case. Unlike many of the other victims of Bundy, she had lived to tell her story, and it helped to put him on trial. On the same day as his failed abduction of Carol DeRanch, just a few hours later, in fact, Bundy would abduct Deborah Jean Kent in Bountiful, Utah. Deborah was a kind, responsible 17-year-old high school student and the oldest of 5 siblings. Deborah had attended a play at Viewmont High School on November 8, 1974, in Bountiful with her parents. During the intermission, she told her parents she was going to step out and pick up her brother from the nearby ice skating rink. The girl never returned. The disappearance of Deborah was swift and baffling. When she failed to show up after the play ended, her family began searching for her and reported her missing to the authorities. Witnesses had later come forward describing a suspicious man wandering the school hallways, asking for a student who did not exist. The man reportedly asked for help in locating the back exit of the school. A set of handcuff keys found near the location of Carol DeRanch's attempted abduction was later tested and found to match the handcuffs used on Carol. During Bundy's eventual confession, he admitted to abducting and murdering Deborah Kent shortly after failing to capture DeRanch. He claimed that he buried Kent's body near Fairview, Utah, but her remains were not found during initial searches. Decades later, in 2015, a human patella was found near the area Bundy described and was tested using advanced DNA methods. It was conclusively identified as Deborah Kent's, finally providing her family with a partial degree of closure more than 40 years after she vanished. Deborah's murder underscores Bundy's impulsive nature and growing desperation. He was willing to strike again within hours of being foiled, increasing the risk and intensity of his crimes. Her case also confirmed to investigators that Bundy was not deterred by close calls. If anything, they seemed to intensify his compulsions. It would be a couple of months before Bundy's next known victim. It was January 12, 1975 in Snowmass Village, Colorado. Corinne Campbell, who was a 23-year-old nurse, was on vacation with her fiancé and his children at the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass Village. She stated that she was going to her hotel room to grab a magazine, but she never returned. Her nude body was found over a month later, just a few miles away. Her body had signs of blunt force trauma. Ted Bundy was eventually charged with her murder, and this case became one of the first where prosecutors were able to build a strong case based on circumstantial and forensic evidence. It was during pretrial hearings for this case that Bundy escaped from the Aspen courthouse. This was his first escape from custody. On March 15, 1975, in Vail, Colorado. Julie Cunningham, 26, who was a ski instructor, vanished while walking to a dinner date. Ted Bundy later confessed to luring her with a fake injury and crutches, one of his signature tactics, then overpowering and abducting her. He claimed to have buried her body near the town of Rifle, Colorado, but her remains were never found. Her disappearance contributed to the growing fear across Colorado communities whose residents were already rattled by Corinne Campbell's murder. Denise Lynn Oliverson would ultimately encounter Ted Bundy on April 6, 1975 in Grand Junction, Colorado. The 24-year-old woman was riding her bicycle to her parents' home. Police would later find her bicycle and sandals near a railroad bridge, but Denise was never seen again. Bundy would later confess that he had thrown her body into the Colorado River. Bundy did not appear to want any of the bodies found, it seems, because, like many of his victims, her remains have never been recovered, and it would seem to be Bundy's way of maintaining some degree of control. This case illustrates Bundy's mobility and, worse still, his ability to trap victims, even in broad daylight with others around. At just 12 years old, Lynette Dawn Culver would serve to be Bundy's youngest victim yet, outside of Kimberly Leach, who we will hear about later. She was abducted from school and never returned home. Bundy never elaborated on why he chose victims this young. He claimed he drowned the girl in a motel bathtub and then disposed of the body in the Snake River. Again, this is one whose remains were never found. This particular murder serves to show the escalation of Bundy's violence and his willingness to prey on younger girls. Susan Curtis of Provo, Utah, disappeared on June 28, 1975. She was on the campus of Brigham Young University attending a youth conference. Bundy admitted to abducting and murdering the 15-year-old girl, along with the claim that he has buried her near Price, Utah. Once again, this was a victim whose remains would never be recovered. This case was especially haunting to investigators because Bundy stated that he had been attending the law school classes at the time. This was a clear indication of how he could easily switch between the facade of normalcy and acts of horrible, monstrous violence. On August 16, 1975, a routine traffic stop in Granger, Utah, marked the beginning of Ted Bundy's unraveling. Pulled over in the early morning hours by Sergeant Bob Hayward for suspicious driving, Bundy fled the scene before finally being forced to stop. Inside his Volkswagen Beetle, police found an odd collection of items: a ski mask, crowbar, handcuffs, rope, trash bags, and a flashlight with the bulb removed. Bundy claimed they were part of a skiing and camping kit, but the tools looked more like a rape and abduction kit. Though initially booked on suspicion of burglary, the arrest raised red flags with local investigators, especially after Bundy was identified in a police lineup by Carol DeRanche, a teenager who had escaped an attempted abduction just months earlier. DeRanche's case had already made waves in Murray, Utah. In November 1974, a man posing as a police officer had convinced her to come with him from a shopping mall, claiming her car had been broken into. She noticed inconsistencies in his behavior and grew suspicious. When he attempted to handcuff her in his car, she fought back and fled. That man was now believed to be Ted Bundy. In February 1976, Bundy stood trial in Salt Lake City and was convicted of attempted kidnapping. He was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison, a standard indeterminate sentence at the time. But even as he sat behind bars, Bundy's past was catching up to him. He was soon linked to the 1975 murder of Corinne Campbell in Colorado and extradited there in 1977 to face murder charges. That extradition would set off a chain of events that shocked the nation, including 2 prison escapes and a trail of new victims. It's worth noting that in the 1970s, law enforcement across the United States operated in isolation. There were no centralized databases, and departments rarely communicated across state lines. Missing person cases weren't often flagged as related, even when the patterns were eerily similar. Bundy moved freely through the cracks of that system, hunting across jurisdictions that didn't yet know how to connect the dots. His 1975 arrest may have stopped him temporarily, but it also showed just how far he'd gotten before anyone realized what he really was. In early 1977, while Ted Bundy sat behind bars in Utah State Prison, serving a sentence for attempted kidnapping, his world began to close in. Though he'd managed to maintain his composure and deny involvement in any murders, evidence was mounting elsewhere, particularly in Colorado, where investigators had connected him to the 1975 murder of Corinne Campbell, a young nurse who had vanished from a hotel in Aspen. Bundy had stayed in the same hotel under an alias at the time of Campbell's disappearance. Her nude body was later found in a snowy field just outside the hotel grounds. Hair samples and eyewitness accounts began to build a case. Colorado issued a warrant, and Utah authorities approved the extradition request. In January 1977, Bundy was officially extradited to Colorado to stand trial for Corinne Campbell's murder. Bundy was transported under heavy guard. By that time, his name had already become notorious in the western United States, and authorities weren't taking chances. Upon arrival in Pitkin County, he was held at the small county jail in Aspen, Colorado, and it quickly became clear that he planned to represent himself in court. That decision granted him a unique privilege. access to the jail's law library located on the second floor of the courthouse. The room had windows, less security, and fewer direct eyes on him. Bundy, always manipulative and observant, took note. Bundy insisted on acting as co-counsel in his defense, which allowed him to remain unshackled in court and move freely between his cell and the law library to prepare motions. At first, the courtroom staff found his legal filings surprisingly articulate. He used proper terminology and often appeared calm and professional. But behind the scenes, Bundy was studying more than case law. He was studying escape routes. On June 7, 1977, less than 6 months after arriving in Aspen, Bundy made his first and most theatrical escape. While alone in the law library, Bundy opened a second-story window, jumped out, and fled into the Colorado wilderness. He had lost 30 pounds in preparation so he could move more swiftly and fit into tighter hiding spaces. Authorities were stunned. For 6 days, he lived off the land in the Rocky Mountains, breaking into cabins and stealing supplies. He shaved his beard, changed his clothes, and evaded search teams combing the mountains on horseback and foot. But eventually, the terrain wore him down. Cold, hungry, and disoriented, Bundy was caught by a pair of deputies near Aspen, driving a stolen car and pretending to be a lost hiker. He was returned to custody, but the warning signs had already been ignored. Bundy was not going to sit quietly through his trial. He wasn't just a killer, he was a hunter, and now he was cornered. Following his recapture, Bundy was moved to Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, a more secure facility. But he wasn't finished. Over the next several months, he managed to cut a hole in the ceiling of his cell, stealing a hacksaw blade and light fixture parts from other areas of the jail. He practiced silently, waiting. And in December 1977, he made his move. On New Year's Eve, while the jail was lightly staffed, Bundy crawled through the ceiling, dropped into a vacant apartment above the jail, changed clothes, and walked out the front door. By the time the jail realized he was gone, Ted Bundy was already en route to Florida. The extradition to Colorado was supposed to bring closure to at least one of Bundy's victims. Instead, it exposed the justice system's inability to contain him. Twice. The state of Colorado had nearly succeeded in convicting him of murder, but instead it became the site of 2 escapes: the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Florida and the final unraveling of one of America's most terrifying killers. For Bundy, Colorado wasn't a dead end. It was a springboard for his most chaotic and final act. Ted Bundy's 2 escapes in Colorado weren't just embarrassing slip-ups for law enforcement. They were catastrophic failures that cost lives. After escaping jail the first time, Bundy was recaptured within 6 days. That alone should have triggered tighter restrictions. But after his second escape on New Year's Eve 1977, he made it all the way to Florida, where he murdered at least 3 more people, including 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. These escapes turned Bundy from a man accused of killing into a man proven capable of killing again and again, even after being caught. They exposed just how ill-equipped the justice system was at the time to handle intelligent, manipulative offenders like him. And they served as a wake-up call for jail security nationwide, especially in how custody was managed for suspects awaiting trial for violent crimes. Had Bundy been properly contained, the Chi Omega murders, the attack on Cheryl Thomas, and the abduction of Kimberly Leach would never have happened. The escapes weren't just part of his story. They were the bridge between containment and carnage. After escaping from a Colorado jail in December 1977, Ted Bundy resurfaced in Tallahassee, Florida, using the alias Chris Hagen. What followed was a final brutal outburst of violence, culminating in the Chi Omega sorority house attack and the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. These were among the most savage and high-profile crimes in Bundy's long trail of destruction. These are those victims in Florida who might still be alive. Had Colorado, and more specifically, officials at Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, been more vigilant and aware that Bundy might try to escape again. Lisa was a junior at Florida State University, studying fashion and a proud member of the Chi Omega sorority. On the night of January 14th to 15th, 1978, She was asleep in her room when Bundy broke in through the back door of the sorority house and launched a series of brutal attacks. Lisa was bludgeoned, sexually assaulted, bitten, and strangled. Her injuries were extensive, and investigators later determined that she died from a combination of strangulation and brain trauma. Bundy left a distinct bite mark on Lisa's buttock, which would become key forensic evidence used in his Florida murder trial. Lisa was described by friends as warm, energetic, and always smiling, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Margaret was also a junior at Florida State and shared the Chi Omega house with Lisa and other sisters. That same night, Bundy entered her bedroom where she was asleep. She was bludgeoned with a piece of firewood, then strangled with a nylon stocking. Unlike Lisa, there were no signs of sexual assault. Investigators believed she died quickly, possibly never waking up during the attack. Margaret was known for her intelligence and ambition. She was studying English and had dreams of pursuing a career in law. Karen was asleep in a different room on the same floor when Bundy continued his rampage. She was bludgeoned in the face and head, suffering a broken jaw, fractured skull, and loss of several teeth. Miraculously, she survived the attack. Karen later testified at Bundy's trial, though she had no memory of the assault. Her survival is often described as one of the few slivers of grace in an otherwise horrific night. Kathy was also attacked that night, in the same room as Karen Chandler. She suffered a fractured jaw, facial lacerations, and a concussion. Kathy would go on to become an advocate for survivors and speak publicly about her experience. Like Karen, she remembered nothing of the attack, only the aftermath, confusion, pain, and the rush to the hospital. Her strength and recovery became symbolic of survival in the face of monstrous violence. Just a few blocks away from the Chi Omega house, Ted Bundy entered the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, a dance major at FSU. Cheryl was asleep when Bundy broke in and bludgeoned her with a club-like object. She suffered a broken jaw, head trauma, permanent hearing loss in one ear, and significant damage to her balance and coordination. Injuries that tragically ended her dreams of becoming a professional dancer. Neighbors heard the noise and called police, likely preventing her death. Bundy fled the scene, leaving behind crucial physical evidence, including a mask and a pantyhose leg with knots tied at each end, likely used for strangulation. Kimberly Leach was a 12-year-old junior high school student in Lake City, Florida. On the morning of February 9th, she left class to retrieve a forgotten item from her locker. Witnesses saw her being led by an unknown man, later identified as Bundy, to a white van parked near the school. She was reported missing within hours, triggering a widespread search. Her body was found 8 weeks later abandoned in a pig shed in Suwannee County. She had been sexually assaulted and bludgeoned to death. Her murder devastated the community and broke whatever illusion remained about Bundy's selective targeting. Kimberly was his youngest and most defenseless known victim. He never fully confessed to her murder, even in his final interviews, though he did admit to it under pressure just before his execution. Of all Ted Bundy's known victims, the murder of Kimberly Diane Leach seemed to disturb him the most. In his final days on death row, as he began confessing to long-denied murders in a desperate bid to delay execution, he consistently avoided speaking about Kimberly. When pressed by investigators and clergy, he would become vague, distant, his usual arrogance noticeably absent. Unlike his other victims, Kimberly was a child. Lynette Culver was too, but Kimberly bothered him the most. There was no pretense of charm, seduction, or manipulation, just raw, opportunistic violence. Even Bundy, who often tried to intellectualize or minimize his crimes, appeared ashamed of what he had done. Some observers noted that his voice would shake when she was mentioned. Others said he physically recoiled from describing her death in detail. In the end, Bundy did admit to abducting and killing Kimberly, but only in the most basic terms, offering no motive, no remorse, and no elaboration. It was the one murder he could not justify, even to himself. The silence said everything. Silence. These Florida attacks shattered the myth that Bundy had a type or some form of control over his compulsion. By January 1978, he was spiraling, driven not by preference but by pure impulse and brutality. His Florida victims, particularly the survivors, became key to his conviction and execution. The forensic evidence, bite marks, hair samples, eyewitness accounts, finally nailed shut the case that had haunted multiple states for years. They are more than names. They are the final proof that Ted Bundy wasn't just dangerous. He was unstoppable, a killing machine, until the system finally held. Bundy's Florida trial became a media sensation, with Bundy choosing to represent himself in court. His charisma and legal knowledge fascinated the public, but it was not enough to save him from a conviction. In July 1979, Bundy was convicted of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. He was later convicted for the murder of Kimberly Leach and received another death sentence. Bundy spent nearly a decade on death row, during which he made several confessions, providing details about his crimes to investigators. Estimates of his total number of victims range from 30 to over 100. He was executed by electric chair on January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison. Outside the prison, crowds celebrated his death, chanting and setting off fireworks. In the final days before his execution, Ted Bundy confessed to killing 30 women across 7 states between 1974 and 1978. The states included Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, California, and Florida, each with its own set of disappearances, unsolved murders, and lingering trauma. While Bundy provided names and details for many of his victims, he remained vague and evasive about others, especially those that lacked hard evidence. Even in confession, Bundy stayed in control, withholding just enough to keep himself relevant, even on the brink of death. Perhaps this made him feel as if he was in control of the entire situation. He often hinted that the true number of his victims was far higher. Some law enforcement officials who interviewed him believed the real figure could be closer to 100 or more, citing Bundy's extensive travel, long stretches of unaccounted time, and his refusal to confirm certain murders. At one point, Bundy cryptically said, "Add 1 digit to that and you'll have it," suggesting his victim count may have exceeded 100, but he never confirmed it outright. Whether that was a final attempt to keep the mystery alive or a rare flash of honesty is something we may never know. Ted Bundy was more than just a killer. He was a master manipulator, a predator who thrived on deception and cruelty. His legacy remains a dark chapter in American history, a reminder of the evil that can hide behind a charming smile. Thank you for watching Hunting the Hunter. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into America's most notorious killers and mass murderers. Our next show will talk about Joe Roy Metheny, a serial killer from southwest Baltimore, Maryland, with ties to Preston County, Terra Alta, West Virginia. Until next time, stay safe and stay informed.